Good morning. First of all, thank you to all of you who've taken part this morning. Sunday mornings are not a performance, are they? Are they? It's more of a family gathering, isn't it? And as Paul writes to the Corinthian church, he literally writes about the dancing hand of the Holy Spirit as the Holy Spirit moves amongst their congregation and ours. And you never know upon whom the hand of the Spirit will rest. And it could be you next week. Could be that as we worship, that there is just a verse or an experience or something that you just know you need to come out and share. And it is difficult. But actually, did you see this morning the way in which the Holy Spirit wove those different things together? So let's be alert, as we were encouraged earlier, to what God is doing amongst us. Who am I? Question I ask every morning. But actually it's a question that runs through our lives. And often we don't realise we're asking this question, but it comes at us in a whole variety of different ways. Who am I? What am I doing? What's life about? And in many ways, our whole consumer culture feeds into that, doesn't it? And particularly our fashion and cosmetic industry. You know, if I dress like this, then I will be, and so forth. So let's go for a bit of expert advice, shall we? In case you don't realise, this is Oprah, queen of the chat shows. She says, forget your career. She's writing to ladies. Forget your career, forget your role as mother or wife, forget how much money you make or how successful you are. If you're struggling with the question, who am I meant to be, this quiz can help you figure out what really defines you. Really? Can an internet quiz actually answer that question? I don't think so. What is it that makes us distinctive, unique? Well, let's go to Genesis and find out. Genesis chapter 1 and verses 24 through to the end of the chapter. Sam introduced this series last week in the beginning, looking at God as creator. And if you weren't around last week, I checked out what it said on the church website this week, and if you weren't around, I encourage you actually to either go to the website or get a copy of it via the church office on CD. Really helpful introduction to this series and to Genesis and the whole science, creation kind of debate and all that kind of stuff. By a scientist, by a professor, really helpful stuff. So if you weren't around, make sure you get hold of that. Genesis chapter 1 verse 24, and God said, we're breaking in halfway through the story. And God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind. And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has its fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. What is it that makes us distinct, every one of us? What is it that sets us apart from the whole of the rest of creation? Well, it's this little phrase, isn't it? Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And the man there is human beings as a whole, men and women. Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. Made in the image of God. That's what sets us apart. And it's not that thousands of pages have been written about this, but I guess thousands of books have as well. You know, it's a huge subject, and we're only just going to skim over the surface this morning. What it is to be made in the image of God. What it is that sets us apart from creation. One of the key ways of understanding the Bible, when you come across something like this, is to look at the context in which it is set. And often you find that the way to understand a verse is by reading it, not just necessarily the chapter, but chapters around it. And sometimes you see, and actually there are two things that you see from the context here that reveal to us what it is to be made in the image of God. Just a little aside, it says, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Some people have made a great difference between being made in God's image and made in God's likeness. I think they're one and the same. It's just the Hebrew way of writing that they often express the same idea in more than one way. But there is, in that little phrase, there is an abrupt and sudden change in the way in which this passage is written. And actually, if you'd read it from the beginning, you might have spotted it. Because up until this point, the way it talks about God is the way we are familiar in creation. You know, God said, and it happens. And God said, and it happens. And God said, and it happens. And God said, and suddenly it changes. Let us make man in our image. Let them, suddenly you get a host of relational words. And then they disappear. You get this burst of relational stuff. Us, our, them. And then it goes back to, and God said. Let us make God in our image. Who's the conversation between? Do you ever talk to yourself? Do you ever get any sense? It's not God talking to himself, it's God talking within himself. It's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in this conversation, in this dynamic conversation. Let us make man in our image. Because we know from the New Testament that Jesus was an active participant in creation. Beginning of John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word, that's Jesus, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And again, Paul writing to the Colossians, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. In fact, before verse 26, before God starts talking in plural, let us, there is the hint of more than one in the Godhead, isn't there, in verse 2? The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. It's a fascinating phrase, actually. I'm not sure I can say this, but I'm going to have a go. It's full of femininity. I just about got away with it. It's a female idea here in the second verse of the Bible. It's a description of God as a mother. Because that's the image. It's the image of a mother bird hovering over a nest and taking care of her young. That's the way this word is used later in the Old Testament. So right at the beginning, you get this idea of God as a mother. In fact, InterVarsity Press are a publishing firm who tend to publish theologically conservative stuff. In their commentary, The Bible Speaks Today, it says this: the motherhood of God is seen in this creativity. So already there's more than one person of the Godhead involved, right from verse 2. But it wasn't just the Trinity. In Job 38, as God says to Job, where were you when I made everything? Did you advise me? Did anybody? At the end of that little passage, it says this: while talking about what was happening in creation, while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. It's picture of creation is of a marvelous team effort. The Trinity at the heart of it, but also the angels and the morning stars watching on and shouting for joy. What a lovely picture of our creative God at work. But at the heart of God and the heart of the image of God is relationship. God is the ultimate relational being. Two's company, three's a what? Is that true? It is to some extent, isn't it? Two's company, three's a crowd. And when there's three of us, the dynamic of relationship can get stretched. God is the ultimate relational being because he is one and he is three, and he is a community of three that really works. Not only that, if you read the passage that we read, verse 26, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. There is something about the creation of the sexes, men and women, that also reflects the image of God. Because I don't know whether you'd noticed, but men and women are very different, aren't they? We're almost sometimes like separate species, aren't we? And actually, in those differences, as we relate well, and we're going to look at this next week, so I've got a week to do some desperate preparation, but as we look next week at men and women and marriage and sex and all that kind of stuff, as we look at that, actually, as two completely different, almost beings relate well together, there is something of God's image, something of God's character reflected in that. Because Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are different, and yet they are united. So being made in the image of God is what sets us apart from the rest of creation. And it's this ability for us to relate and to live as relational beings that is at the heart of what it is to be a human being. Yes, God relates to the rest of creation, but he relates uniquely to us. Yes, we relate to the rest of creation and the created order, but our ability to relate to God and to one another is unique. It's what sets us apart. And that relationship with God was spoilt through the fall, but it has been restored. That's what we've been enjoying this morning, isn't it? Were you aware of the presence of God this morning amongst us? Of actually Genesis 1 verse 2 being true as the Holy Spirit hovered over us this morning, like a mother bird over her young. But also, we have this ability to relate to one another. When we relate to one another, human beings are able to relate in a way that the rest of creation is not able to relate. Yes, the birds and the bees do it. I can't remember the rest of the song. You know, they relate. Yeah, it's all right. I don't need to know it. Okay. Thank you for your help. But they relate, but not in the same way. Not to the same degree as we are able to do. And it's interesting that a phenomenal percentage of the letters to New Testament churches are about relationships. They're about how to relate well to one another in marriage, in family, in the wider family, in society, at work, and so on. It's about relationships. And these two are interconnected, aren't they? And again, the New Testament makes that very clear. As we are able to relate to God, then actually that should increase our ability to relate well to others. And as we learn to relate well to those around us, it helps us in our relationship with God. I'm not going to expand on this morning, but a lot of people say that actually it's in relationships that we discover who we are. Discuss. Well, you will do if you're in a cell group and doing the notes. But we're different as individuals, and we have different ways of expressing this. Some of us are extroverts. Not in the sense that we wear wild clothing, not that kind of sense of extrovert, but a true extrovert is somebody, you actually get your energy from other people. You love to be with other people. The contrast is the introvert, who actually too much time with other people